Thank you all for staying. Excuse me, didn't mean to break into tears. So thank you all for staying. This hopefully will be the bright, shining panel of the day, riveting. For those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in politics for most of my life, about 35 years. Started in Idaho, and I was a Republican chairman in Idaho Falls when Chuck Winder was running for governor way back yonder, and so we've known each other for a few years. And so I'm really glad to be here, and we've got Representative Chistofferson is with us. He's been a tremendous ally for those of us who are interested in safe roads. I see Rick shaking his head. We appreciate our friends. And when I very first got involved with NCFOR, one of the things that we did was we had a concern about the bidding process in the state of Utah. You can have multiple winners on a bid, and then the state had changed the law a couple of years ago, which made sense, which was if somebody's willing to sell it to us for less than we paid for it, why not let them, they get to sell us product and we get to buy it for cheap. So that made good sense. Except when you have multiple bidders and they've all contracted for a price, then somebody drops their price and somebody else drops their price, and pretty soon, you kind of diminish or you've actually eliminated the reason why you have a bidding process. And so we were able to meet with Senator Darren Owens and help craft the bill, and Representative Chistofferson picked it up and ran with it in the state House of Representatives, and it's made the bidding process fair. One of the things that we did in that process is we're absolutely product neutral, but we want the system to be fair for everybody, good government, and that's why I think everybody that gets involved, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're trying to make the system better for everybody. And so, so we'll talk a little bit about trying to find value in government. But I did want to go back. We've seen, Carlos showed us here, they had $300 million budget. Now it's in the billions. I remember when I moved to Idaho, I think the state budget was around $500 million. I just read today it was like $5 billion now. And I know Utah's grown the same way. There's always more demand than there are resources. My father was very conservative. He used to like to point out that back in the 1960s, we actually moved from Salt Lake to Boise. The governor had proposed a bill to allow a state state sales tax. And at the time, it was going to be 3%, and the sales pitch was, if we get 3%, we will have all the money we need. We'll have enough money for education. We'll never need to increase that again. I think the state sales tax is 6% now, and there's always pressure to spend more, do more. Costs go up, and you're trying to be competitive with the private sector, and there's always more demands. I'm sure Utah's kind of probably gone through the same cycle. It's everywhere in government. It was just for those who are interested, back in 1931, Utah adopted a state income tax. In 1933, 2 years later, they approved a 0.75% sales tax, and so that was less than 1%. Today, the sales tax is 6.1%. So, always a demand to spend more. When it comes to transportation budgeting for roads and highways and snow removal and upkeep, how do legislators deal with that? I mean, you're a chairman of the House Transportation Committee. What's the process of striking the balance?
Well, in the funding process, it's always a tug of war. And you have finite resources, and you just have to say, as a legislature, what's our priority? And kind of like what Carlos was saying, you know, when there's a snowfall, that's their priority. And they put off purchases of equipment, they put off maintenance, and eventually they canceled the project to put money into snow. So that it's a tug of war of priorities is what it is.
Chuck, what's your experience?
Well, I think, it always is, you'll never have enough money to do what everyone wants you to do. And I go back to the recession, our revenues went down almost a third in our state. And so we cut budgets and we used all of our rainy day funds. But the key issues in Idaho are education, transportation. And so that's where we put most of our money. And transportation is interesting because at one time, talking about as when I served on the transportation board in Idaho, it was about a 50-50 state funds with federal funds. Today, it's about a third federal funds and 2/3 state funds. We have a dedicated fund. We have to spend certain funds that we receive, gas tax, those types of things, on the roads and bridges. So on one hand, we have a lot of freedom that we give to our board. We actually have a board that's appointed by the governor. We have a 7-member board, and the chairman is appointed at large. But they're the ones that the legislature trusts. They're the ones that have given the authority to them to budget and prioritize funding. We don't do earmarks for projects. And so maybe a little bit different system, but trying to do the same things, trying to save lives. Yeah. That's our goal. Move traffic, because it's part of the economy.
You mentioned that you're getting less federal dollars now. I assume that's the same for Utah.
Correct.
So how do you, is it the gas tax that you have to raise to deal with that, or how do you deal with that?
Well, I think, we've raised the gas tax. We did some things that we used Garvey funding for some major projects that we couldn't fund, directly out of the existing funds, which meant we used, I think, up to 30% of our federal funds to do bonded indebtedness. That worked really well. It hit right at the beginning of the recession. We got great prices. We actually did almost 30% more than the original project list was because of those savings. So we hit it at a great time. The then Senator Little, who's now governor, hated Garvey, and he voted against it. And last year, one of his programs was a state-funded system, very similar to Garvey, where we used a portion of state revenues to bond up to about $1.6 billion in major projects. So that's kind of the way we do it, and things that work well, we try to adapt to, and so it's an ongoing process. But again, you'll never have enough money to do everything everybody wants you to do.
Maybe you could explain a little bit about what Garvey is. Those of us who've been around know what it is, but
does anybody know what Garvey is or doesn't know? Garvey was basically a grant anticipation revenue vehicle that the federal government allowed you to use, the states to use a portion of their federal money to use for bonded funding and debt service payments. You could choose to use pretty much any percentage of it you wanted. We put in Idaho a cap of 30% of our federal revenue. We have gone in and paid off those bonds early when we've had extra resources, but it was just basically a vehicle to finance major improvements. And by that, it might be $100, $200, $300 million project, and we used it for a program called Connecting Idaho. And so we tried to improve our interstate. We tried to improve our north-south major roads, those types of things.
yeah. So we talked a little bit about gas taxes as I looked the other day, and I was very surprised at the range of taxes that are out there. Anybody know what the gasoline tax is in Texas? 5 cents. Anybody else want to take a guess? 2 cents. 2 cents a gallon. Pennsylvania, anybody want to take a guess what the other end of the spectrum is? 61 according to what I read. It could be 64. So that's a heck of a gap, a heck of a range. Idaho's gasoline, diesel tax is 32 cents. Utah's 34.5. I know Wyoming's a little less, Arizona's less, but you know, every state has their own situation. Where do you see that going? Do you see gas taxes just staying where they are? Is there pressure to lower them, raise them?
There's pressure both ways. So it's hard for, you know, the federal government hasn't changed their tax since 1993, I think it is. But Utah back in 2016 raised the gas tax 5 cents because it was just a set tax. And we raised it 5 cents, but then we also put an index on there to the CPI. And so it does go up, and then we're not always in this tug of war of do we raise taxes or do we
And
let
nobody
the
wants-
projects go under?
And nobody wants to vote for a tax increase.
That's right.
So I thought you were going to go a different direction there. I heard a congressman once say that when it came to some proposal, he said, some of my friends are for it, some of my friends are against it, and I stand firmly with my friends. And very, very brave. So I'm glad you had the strength to answer that question.
Same thing in Idaho, might I say, no one wants to raise taxes. In fact, we've prided ourselves in giving back about $3 billion in tax rebates in the last 3 years, so it's tough. And I think anytime you look at what's going on with electric vehicles, you look at the issues we have with vehicles getting 40 miles to the gallon, and we're basically using a fuel tax to pay for our roads, it makes it more and more difficult. So we're looking at lots of different options on how to deal with that in the future.
The other thing that's complicated this is, you know, we might be getting more in gas tax, and the economy's been pretty good that way as far as income tax and things like that. And so Utah's been able to give some tax credits and reductions. But the problem is the economy's been steaming away pretty good. And any of you that have tried to get some work done the last 2 or 3 years, it's been tough. So what's happened is inflation is going up, and the costs of building roads and maintaining them have gone up, and interest rates have gone up. So the cost of everything's going up, and it's outpacing any indexing we've done, I think.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I know back in the 90s, I was in the governor's office and was the first Republican governor in 24 years. And one of the things he did, I think, was first or second year, was raise the gas tax a nickel. And he took a lot of grief. It's like, I thought I voted for a conservative, and but even back then, we were looking at vehicles getting more miles to the gallon. So they're paying the state less for the damage done to the road. And at some point, when you're, unlike the federal government, where you can, just keep spending without worrying about where the money comes from, states actually have to balance their budgets, and you have to make hard decisions.
I think Governor Batt at that time had been chairman of the Transportation Board for several years, and he understood the problems of funding that they were having to provide safe roads and to grow our system and expand it. And I think that was the reason he was willing to take the political heat for the increase.
Yeah, the roads, back in my college days, I worked on a road construction crew in Wyoming, and the roads don't get cheaper if you delay. A little bit of preventive maintenance goes a long ways to saving money for the taxpayer. When it comes to winter storms, obviously, National Coalition for Open Roads, we're very interested in winter roads and how states deal with that from a budgeting perspective. We heard Carlos say that he doesn't want to have money just sitting there not doing something, which I totally get. But how do you find that balance between budgeting for major snowstorms and banking that money for, heavy years like we just had this last winter. Is there any special funds that you have set up, or do you like the way that if you need to, you have a special session? We can talk about that in general.
Well, normally what we do is take the rolling 3-year average of what we've spent on road, snow removal, and then we just say that's what we're going to put in the budget for the next year. And of course, this last year was way unusual. I mean, I think we normally get around 750 inches of snow max. We got 900 inches this year, and which is good. It was a good thing after 8 or 9 years of drought. So we're glad to have it, but it almost doubled the cost of our snow removal. And so as a state, we were saying, we know that there's going to be ups and downs, so we're going to be flexible with the needs of the state, and we'll allow UDOT to use some temporary measures, but if they're, from their operations budget. But if there's a significant change like there was this year, we were glad to work it out with them to make them whole, or at least to reprioritize some of their budget.
Chuck, what about?
I'd say ditto, basically. We have no special funds set aside within the department or within the state budget for that. One of the things that I try to compare a snow event to is our fire events. When I first got in the legislature 15 years ago, our fire budget was somewhere averaged $5 to $20 million a year. We're now up to $100 million a year for fire protection for our state lands, and we have some agreements with federal lands when they join, and so it's a huge increase there. But the department has to manage pretty much on their own. They've had great experience with it over the years, and again, the legislature trusted them to manage. They haven't made any special requests for additional funding, but we give them the flexibility to move funds around without our permission. Basically, we give it to them as a one-time. They can use it as they need it. So
I know when I worked briefly for a year for a state agency, and it was interesting to me. We got a lot of different small amounts of money from different federal programs, which we then had to divvy up, and became very staff-intensive, time-consuming, and a lot of the staff were just like, why can't they just give us a chunk of money and just empower us to do our jobs? But that's, I said, having worked in legislation and with legislators, every congressman, senator, representative, state legislator, you want to have that bill that you get your name on it, and we got a special program to help grandma, or we got a special program, and it's a good press release. Sometimes it's not that good when the rubber hits the road because you've spent it all in administrative costs. So we've talked a bit about winter storms and that sort of thing, but a lot of what we've talked about here in this meeting today is technology and how that's coming on. We know electric vehicles are becoming a bigger and bigger priority and bigger reality in our current system. So how do you foresee legislators dealing with how those vehicles are going to pay for the roads?
Well, I think, that's obviously a very difficult issue. One of the earlier panelists today talked about the idea that they were providing observation of, different things. And if you said that in Idaho, that'd probably kill whatever you were going to try and do, because people don't like being observed. They don't like, Big Brother. They don't like a lot of those things. So I think that's, part of this whole issue with electrical vehicles. You go to a mileage tax, and then how do you keep track, because they feel like, again, that you're following them around, keeping track of how far they're going and when they're going and all those kind of things. So you can't use some kind of GPS link. You can't, I mean, it's a weird environment when you start talking about non, gas fueled vehicles or diesel fueled vehicles. Yeah. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's going to happen at some point because more and more vehicles are becoming electric.
So for us, it's kind of a fairness issue. We're saying, why should the gasoline operators subsidize those who drive electric vehicles? And we said, okay, let's set up a road user charge or a RUC system. And what we said is, okay, we're just going to take a number that's pretty fair. It's right now, I think it's just a little over $130 a year for registration fees for electric vehicles. They can either do that or they can opt into the RUC program, which is voluntary. And I think we've got 4,000 people doing that right now, but they just report their mileage. And if it exceeds the $130, then we just cap it at that. If they don't use as much, then we charge them what they use. And we've thought about, we've looked at telematics or GPS or whatever. There's some concerns about privacy, but it's also expensive, to use the telematics and have a third-party manager that collects that information and scrubs it and gives it to the state to give the invoices. And so we just said, is the squeeze worth the juice? We want to just say, maybe we can just say, let's have them self-report and possibly figure out another way to true it up, at emissions inspections or something like that. But we'd have some people skating on that possibly, or take advantage of the system. But I think for the price you pay for the telematics and that kind of thing, we just said it's worth the risk. And so, and the other thing we thought is, why have gasoline or diesel users on a RUC system? Because the way you collect the revenues for gas and diesel has been really efficient and effective. Let's just do that, and then have those who have electric vehicles on the RUC program, or just pay a registration fee. So we're still working that through and testing it out, and maybe technology will improve to where we can track the mileage a little better and safer, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, for both of you, I was actually speaking to my brother the other day in Pocatello, and he was really incensed. He'd read some article about how states were going to track people that drive electric vehicles, and he thought that was an invasion of privacy. And I said, well, somebody's got to pay for the roads, and I don't know how it's got to be fair to everybody, and there's got to be some system. But good luck. Good luck to you guys. I'm glad you ran for office.
Yeah, we tried a $75 fee for hybrids, and when they were first hitting the markets, and that was way too much money. That was a tax increase, and we were all a bunch of bums. So it's not an easy solution for that one.
Yeah. So one of the things I discovered when I came to work for this esteemed organization is that there's a variety of differences in salt. And who knew? I just thought salt was salt. You put it on the road. I know some of my friends and we went up to Idaho. We met with a bunch of people early on, and one of them was a former state budget director who had been there during the declining years. And he said, my job was to just see how much money I could save every year as the revenue kept going down and down. And he said, I told my guys, just, buy the cheapest thing out there. And we were able to go in and say, and he's now head of the Farm Bureau there, and we said, well, there's different varieties of products, and some, yeah, they cost you more, but in the right winter weather conditions, they're actually cheaper because you only have to put them down once. They keep the roads open down to 0 versus plain white salt, which is good to about 15, 20 degrees somewhere. So that gets down in kind of the nitty gritty of, road maintenance. Is there any group out there that tells that story amongst legislators? Is that something is that a role for us to play, to educate?
I don't think there's been any organized group. I think it's been basically the suppliers, the vendors that have been trying to tell that story over the years. Idaho, because of our varying road conditions, have used a variety of products on our roads. We try and keep our freeways clean, clear, dry. That's our approach there. We do a lot of pre-storm preparation on not only the state roads, but on, in the case of Ada County, which is kind of the largest population base in the valley there, a lot of pre-storm preparation with mag chloride and other treatments. Still use a little bit of salt for certain types of conditions when there's ice and the weather's right, but really have gone to some of these other products which seem to work pretty well. Now, when they first came out, the trucking community was really opposed to them because they were corroding their lights and their trailers and things like that. I think that's been resolved pretty much, but there are always those kind of issues when you start dealing with corrosion of equipment. But it seems to work pretty well and has provided a lot of safety.
Most Utah legislators wouldn't care, wouldn't know that there's a difference, or wouldn't care, and they would just say, that's really into the weeds. Why don't we just let UDOT deal with it? And I think that's the way they look at it. I've talked to UDOT a little bit about, when they bid the projects out, and I think they do this now. They say if it's this quality of salt and it gets down to, if it melts ice at 20 degrees, then that's, bid this product. If it melts ice at 0 degrees, then we'll bid this. And I think they're looking at that, but I think one of the problems is standardizing measurements and determining what the value of that is when they bid it.
Well, Senator Winder, you led both Ada County and the state transportation department, so you have a deep depth of knowledge about road issues. What would you say to your counterparts or to those here? What are some of the takeaways from all that experience that you have regarding winter road maintenance and just highway issues in general?
When I first came on the Ada County Highway District Board, which is, by the way, the only countywide highway district in the United States, which was brought about by a vote of the League of Women Voters as an initiative to consolidate the 7 cities in the area and have standard equipment and management and that type of thing, but also the way the money would be spent. So when I first got there, they had 7 snow plows, but only 1 that could fit on an existing truck. We just don't have that much snow. So they didn't put a lot of money into it. And then my second year in, 1983, 1986, were huge snow years. And and they didn't have any equipment. So that was part of our whole transitional effort, was to get snow plows and trucks, equipment that could use it. And we actually went out and used the private contractors to remove snow in downtown Boise and other areas, because we had like 3 feet of snow in downtown. So we look for a lot of different ways today. There's pre-treatment, there's all sorts of things going on that make it a lot easier. The highway district has equipment to remove snow in a timely manner. The state obviously, in my opinion, does a great job of removing the snow, just like you saw on the videos you watched here in the pictures. So I think it takes a real team effort. These people, it seems to always snow on New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve. I don't know why it is, but and they're out there working, and we don't give them enough thanks and appreciation. But it takes a team and takes a concerted effort, and it varies from year to year, amazingly different.
Yeah, it is. Well, one of the things, and I think you kind of touched on that a bit, is trying to find value, and it goes to this with when you have heavy snowstorms and then a couple of years without and then heavy again. Again, when we were doing our road trips and meeting with different states, some of us traveled over to Wyoming, and we met with the Department of Transportation over there. And one of their directors, assistant directors, said to us, he goes, "I've got a rainbow fleet." And I, in this day and age of political correctness, I was a little wondering where they were going there. But he said, we've got Toyota, we got Chevy, we got GM, we got, all these. He goes, the state legislators had always said, buy the cheapest product you can get, which, you're a taxpayer, that's what you want. But they found over time, as just with any company that's running a fleet of vehicles, that it was costing a fortune because, different types of oils, different fuel filters, different oil filters, it was actually costing them more. And so that's one of the things we met with Representative Chistofferson is we talked about value. And is there any effort in Idaho to find value, or is it strictly just, get the cheapest thing you can get?
No, it's not the cheapest thing you can get. We do a lot of things to make sure we have qualified vendors, qualified contractors. So lowest bid isn't always the right way to do it, and so it depends on how the contract's written. We're still obligated as best we can to get the best pricing and the best value out of that, but that's changed over the years, and so we're given more ability to the departments to do the things they need to do to get it done right. Standardization of equipment is part of that, and so it isn't always just low bid, but even that creates some problems, and we get sued sometimes, and so it's just part of the ongoing battle, but we try and do what's, right for the people. One of the things when we were selling the Garvey program to the legislature was, what's a life worth? And we had 2-lane roads, undivided roads that we, as you know, made into 4-lane divided roads, and the fatality rate went from 6 to 0. So there was that much difference in the safety of the traveling public. The number of accidents went down. So we could prove the value, and I think that was one of the things that swayed the governor now to bring in a program similar to Garvey with state funds, is because it really does save lives. If you do projects right, freeways are the safest, 2 lanes are the worst. And anything you can do to improve those is going to make a huge difference.
So, Kay, you kind of led the way in the legislature on striking that value proposition. What's been the feedback? Have you gotten any feedback since then, or?
Well, I was just talking to Carlos Maceras about that as we were eating and before we ate lunch, and he hasn't heard much back. I haven't heard much back from it, and so apparently it's working okay, or maybe it's just it hasn't been implemented long enough, but I haven't had any feedback.
Well, I know some of the state agencies, when we were going through that process, if you're just the person that's in charge of the bidding, it's easy to say, well, there's the lowest price, and that's what I'm going to do. To evaluate value actually requires some thought, and it probably does open you up into lawsuit situations, and so.
So I'm a civil engineer, and I worked for a construction company for my career, a lot of my career was bidding. So I understand a lot of the ways that you can bid and the how tough it is to evaluate the value of a quality of a product, or other than just evaluating price. And we used to do design build projects, and the design build just says, we're not only going to take your price as part of the formula for seeing if we're going to award the contract to you, but we're also going to look at your quality of your team, your track record, your plan to get things done, your schedule. So they evaluate all those things. And I think when it gets complex, like the quality of the salt and how it's used, and does it perform better at a lower temperature, and is it going to last longer so you don't have to put so many applications, or what's the traction like? All of those things, they're a little bit complex, and you've got to figure out a way to say, how do I put that together in a bid so that I can be fair giving that to awarding a contract without getting sued.
Very good. Well, we've got about 5-10 minutes left. So Tammy, do you want to, or Daniel, do you want to bring the microphone over there? And
just real quick, appreciate you gentlemen being here with us today. When you look at general maintenance, how do you look at the percentage of funds that go to maintenance, and that of course includes winter maintenance, but also to say new construction or new projects, and how is the evaluation made in looking at, okay, we're going to build X number of new lane miles this year. How do we plan for the care for those roads down the road? And it's a lot more exciting to build something than it is to maintain something, and just wondered how that is evaluated and looked at.
So if I can, we have actually two different funds. We have a transportation fund that takes care of the maintenance, and that is mostly taken from the gas tax and some registration fees. And then we have a transportation investment fund that does all of the new construction. And that is funded through sales tax. And I think Carlos said it was about 20.68%. So they just use what they've got in those funds for those purposes. And each of those funds, like I think the maintenance, I get this right, the maintenance fund has increased 5% per year over the last 5 years, except for the COVID year. And then I think it's higher than that in the transportation investment fund. I think it's 8%. I can't remember the number, but it's a little higher. And so we feel like there's a distinction on how to use those funds, and they can use them all, and they'll just have to go through prioritization processes to decide how far that money stretches.
You don't see one outpacing the other over a period of time.
Well, it's hard to tell, because like the last 3 years, our legislature has put in almost $1 billion a year or more of one-time funds from excess that we've just put in the transportation, said, here's some extra money that we want to accelerate our schedule on roads to get more done. So I guess I haven't noticed too much of a disparity there.
I think, during the recession, we took the approach that as funds were being reduced, basically, that the key thing was maintaining the system we had. And so we basically directed the department to put the money into maintenance, maintaining the roads, because if you get behind, it's hard to catch up. Exactly. And it costs you a lot more to do things. And then once we came out of the recession, we've seen this huge inflation, it was probably one of the best things we did. So not only did we use their existing money for that, but we used the Garvey funding for expansion of the system, adding lanes or extending freeways or major roadways. So it's a balancing act, and it changes from time to time. But again, you'll never have enough money to do everything what everybody wants you to do, but you got to maintain your system as your basis.
So I have a question about the challenge, I think, that comes at the legislative level of kind of service levels when it comes to wintertime maintenance. And we see, quite a bit of difference from state to state, even from county to county or city to city in terms of service level and expectations. And it seems like one of the challenges that we have in government is everything's kind of earmarked in buckets, right? Like was talked about with even there's a, $25 million wintertime budget, which can be bumped up or not. But when we look at the costs of either road closures or even slowdowns or things that are caused by winter storm events, and that disruption being in the range of maybe 30 million up to $1 billion, we see in some studies of a day of slowdown or shutdown, which includes accidents, more litigation, even guardrail repair. I mean, on and on, right? In addition to safety and injury and loss of life. I'm curious what conversations are going on, do you see going on in regard to how do we bridge this dilemma of, yeah, there's all those benefits from higher service levels, but if I'm Carlos or the DOT, they don't come out of my budget or they don't come back to my budget, right? So yeah, if I spend a little more or do a little more to create a better service level that has great, not only safety benefit, but also economic impact, positive economic impact, it's still not in my budget, right? In the private sector, it kind of comes back to you in some form. But in government, yeah, we saved money in guardrail repairs over here. We got more tax revenue because businesses were open. But that's still different buckets. It's different than what I'm looking at right now when I'm responsible for service levels on the roads. So I'm just curious what conversations are happening, or are there conversations happening in regard to how do we take something where the economic benefit far outweighs the cost of higher and higher service levels, but it's challenging because of the way it's financed?
That's really a difficult question to answer, but I think some of the things that we try to do as far as service level, like on the interstate, or keep our trucks moving by having this clear and dry policy that takes salt products of some kind, but it's important. It's important for economy. It's important for emergency vehicles. That's kind of the way we've evaluated it. We think it's worth the extra effort, and it helps our private sector. Our state is doing really well, from the standpoint of generating new jobs, new investment, relocations to our state. And I think it's because of those kind of maybe little things you do that make it easier for people to go about their daily lives and to get their commerce moved from maybe a farm field or a storage shed or Chobani and Twin Falls. There's lots of different things you're trying to do to keep your economy going, because that's what pays for people to live. That's the middle class. You heard the congressman talk about the middle class. That's what we're trying to, take care of and enrich, and try and provide safety for those people moving about.
I think that, oh yeah.
And I apologize, I've got to go catch an airplane, so thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
The stage is yours. Okay.
Good luck to you.
Thanks for sharing it for a minute. Thanks everybody for having me down.
So, Kay, did you want to add to
Yeah.
that? And then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I know that over the years, UDOT has had lots of experience clearing the roads, and if they don't clear the roads to the satisfaction of the people that they're serving, the government's there to respond to the needs of the citizens, then they hear about it. And And I just think that they pretty much know the sensitive spots for the most part. And they're gonna do all they can to clear the roads in a timely manner. And if it costs a little bit more, they understand that it's costing the citizens probably more than it is the state. And if the citizens are willing to pay for that, which so far they have, then UDOT's gonna make them happy and do what they can. I think they've done a great job. I don't know. I mean, it'd be hard for me to imagine how you could do it better because they get the forecasts of when the snow's coming in, the weather reports, and they go out and pre-treat. Then they're right there with their full forces for around the clock, pretty much. So I think it's just a matter of, taking care of the citizens, and if they're willing to pay for it, then do it.
Very good. All right, time's up, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. If we get a round of applause for Representative Chistofferson.